name's Gary Sheehan. I'm going to be presenting a session on winning a battle doesn't mean we're winning the war. For those that were here for the last session, this is kind of a little bit like the last session. But what I would hopefully get into in this one really is what are we doing about it, or what can we do about it? So the analogy I'd like to use here is individually, with our own companies, we may be winning our individual battles. We might be securing our organizations appropriately. We might be doing a good job. But overall, what I'd like us to look at is security as an industry, security as all the professionals working together. And to ask ourselves as a whole, are we winning the battle? Are we doing the right things? As it says there, are we doing the best job we can for our companies? So before we get started, who here thinks we're winning the battle? Excellent, because then I can go through some slides and then really get into it. If we all thought that we did a good job and we were doing what we had to do, then I would just say, okay, fine, we're done, and we can move on to the next presentation, who's ever in this room. But some of the stuff that I'd like to bring up, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because really it's all about, I don't have to convince you that we're in trouble, right? One of the things I like to do during my presentation is put up this little hashtag for questions, because sometimes you have questions during the event, sometimes you have questions after the event. Certainly you can tweet out to that hashtag. There's folks back at the office, I believe, hopefully, looking at it, and they'll respond. And throughout the day, I'll check it out and I'll respond as I can, and hopefully we'll get maybe we can continue the conversation around this presentation if you find it interesting. A warning on this one, okay? So when we get into talking about some of the solutions, I can almost guarantee you that the solutions that I'm going to talk to you about today are not the traditional ones, hopefully. If they are, let me know. It's certainly not the standard stuff. I'm not going to be talking about putting in IDS tools and how to configure those things. But it's kind of staying at the high level, looking at the big picture, and really asking you questions, hopefully you can ask me questions on what does this really mean and what are we talking about here. So we're really going to talk, I broke this down into 4 sections. One is kind of looking at the State of the Union. What do we got today? What are we looking at today? Second part is ideas and concepts for improvements. And here's where I'll ask you, I'll give you some of mine. Perhaps you can give me some of yours. Finally, we'll look at some tools, because if you have ideas for improvements and some concepts, generally they'll take a tool maybe to implement. And then finally some Q&A. All right, so we're going to start off with the State of the Union. We've already talked about, we all believe the State of the Union kind of sucks today. So what can we do to fix this? There are some things happening out there that are pretty current. Ransomware is rampant, as you know. And one of the things that Mandiant recently said that the most interesting new trend that should be through 2015 and 2016 was an increase in the number of disruptive attacks. I think we all know that breaches are important, or breaches, grab the attention of the media. But more and more today, we're looking at attacks that are more disruptive than anything. Their main goal is to disrupt our lives and disrupt our businesses. Here's some stuff from CSO magazine, 736 million records exposed. And we've only started, and based on what we're hearing today, it's going to be far surpassed again in 2016. Of course, we all know about the Internal Revenue Service and their problems with protecting records. So it's just not citizens, it's just not corporations, but it's the government as well. So this phenomena of data problems and information security problems really permeates every facet, within the world, it seems. HP recently released some statistics about the state of operations security, and what they really said in this piece of research, 85% of the organizations assessed in their annual report weren't even meeting the minimum requirements. And some of the things that they found were problems with documentation, problems with clearly defined testing of incident response. Meaningful business-oriented security metrics don't exist in many of the organizations. Education is woefully lacking, not only at the user level, but at the technician level. And then finally, fully utilized technology assets, meaning they saw a lot of one-offs. You buy a suite of products and maybe you only implement one module because that's all you have time for. They recommend implementing, and if you're going to buy the entire suite, implement the entire suite and get the most benefit usually from that. And then finally, an Experian report. They have a 2016 data breach industry forecast, whole bunch of stuff that they recommend or that they forecast in 2016. So really, this was just information to say, yep, we're all probably on the same page, we're all right, we're having some problems, and what is it that we can do to help that. So here's where I really wanted to spend the bulk of the presentation. Talking about some ideas and concepts for improvements. I believe that most of us, again, I can't talk about your individual organizations, you're probably winning your battle, but as the war goes, I think most of us need changes in our corporate culture in order to ensure that we can win the war overall. And what do I mean by that? It's really taking some of these bullet points here that I've listed out. And if any of you are familiar with some of the resiliency frameworks out there, you'll see that a lot of these points here mirror what you might find in a resiliency framework or resiliency processes. It's no longer appropriate really to stand on the sides and say, hey, I don't know about that, that's not my job, don't show me anything, I don't want to look at it, and if I don't say anything bad about something, we're good. And that really can't happen anymore. So we're going to go down these points in a little bit more detail, but we're going to talk about understanding and embracing your role, whatever that role is in the organization that you serve, building a business-aware security culture, and not just a security culture, but a business-aware security culture. I think there's a difference there. Being informed and staying informed, setting direction within your security program, bringing coherence between your program and organizational goals and objectives, developing an adaptive capacity, strengthening the organization, validating and reviewing and measuring maturity and measurement. So those are the concepts that we're going to talk about as they pertain to your security program. So, ideas and concepts for improvement. What do we mean by that? Understanding and embracing your role. This really goes back to understanding what your responsibilities are within the organization, what your current job description is. I know it's basic, but do you really know why you're there? Do you know what your role is? Do you know what your responsibilities are? Do you know what you need to do in order to succeed in what they're being asked and what you're being asked to do? What does your business do to succeed? How does that get measured? How do your stakeholders succeed, and who are your stakeholders? Do you know who your stakeholders are? Maybe who your primary stakeholders are, who your secondary stakeholders are. You know what your boss needs to succeed. And again, we're not even here yet talking about security, but in your role as a security professional, you're dealing with different people. This all has an impact on really how successful you are in your job. And then finally, how is your success measured? And what do you need to do to succeed? An important one I see in many organizations is, how do others in your organization view you? Do you have influence over them? Can you guide them? Can you educate them? Do they treat you like you're just in the way all the time? Yes, sir.
Sometimes they don't even know everything you do.
That's exactly right. Do they even know what you do? Do they even know you're there and you have responsibilities for security? And then how do they view your role? They may have a whole different opinion of what you're responsible for based on, compared to what you think you're responsible for. And it's not to really go out and tell people, but part of your role is to really understand and embrace what you do so that you can be successful. And I think, to me, that's one of the biggest things in the security environment, security profession today is understanding really why we're in our organizations. Yep, most of us in there probably put controls in, right, and stop people from doing things. But at the end of the day, I would challenge you to say, I don't think that's it. Probably 90% of the folks, if not more, as a security professional, your role is to identify maybe and manage risk as well as enable your organization to succeed. So it's not always saying no. It's most of the time saying yes and helping people figure out how to make that yes happen. So understanding and embracing your role, I think, is an idea and concept for improvement that as a whole the industry could really take advantage of. Building a business-aware security culture. I think as security folks, we need to know what our business culture is. I've been in organizations as a consultant, and I've had to ask, they've brought me in to kind of help them build a program, and I've asked IT executives, I've asked IT directors, I've asked CIOs, what does your business do? Aside from maybe saying, well, we sell things, that was about it. How do they measure their success? Well, I don't know. What are you doing to help enable the business to succeed? Well, I just do what they tell me. That's not setting yourself up to succeed. That's not setting yourself up for your business to succeed. Really understanding what your business needs and building security into that business culture, I think, is important. We talked about knowing who your customers are and your primary and secondary stakeholders. I think that's very important to know who those people are that rely on you either for information or for solutions, and how you can provide that information and solutions to those individuals so they can succeed. If you're able to succeed in your job and they're able to succeed in their job, chances are the organization has a better chance to succeed in its goals and objectives. Understanding communication and education. That's a big part, I think, in what most security professionals need to do. They need to understand how to communicate and how to educate, because those are two big roles that they have to perform throughout the organization. They have to communicate with probably most of the organization, if not the whole organization, and they have to know how to educate people at different levels of the organization, especially in what those different levels need to know. And finally, I mentioned before a little bit of influence. What's your sphere of influence within your organization? How many people do you think you can effectively influence to do something? Now, your direct reports, sometimes it's, a threat of, hey, if you don't do it, you get fired, or you're not getting a raise or a bonus. But your true test of influence is to be able to influence those folks above you to do what you need them to do, or to do what you think is in the best interest. So think about that in your organization today. What is your sphere of influence, and how can you, if it's not big enough, or if you don't think it's big enough, how can you make that larger? Maybe it's through communication and education. I would think that that's probably one of the big things that you need to start working on. So, second one is building a business-aware security culture. Third one, be informed and stay informed. So as security folks, we have to be informed, right? We have to know what's going on today, especially in the security industry, on the web and everything that's going on with all the attacks. And we have to stay informed. We have to stay up on top of things. Because, as you know, IT, security, everything, even your organization, changes on a daily basis. So you're doubly challenged to stay informed about your own roles and responsibilities and your own job, what you have to do from security, so you have to stay informed there. But you also have to stay informed as far as your organization goes. Where's your organization going? Again, what are their goals and objectives from year to year to year? Do you understand the overall strategy of your organization? If not, that's something that we as folks need to do as security professionals. And I'll say it no matter what level you're at in the organization, whether you're at an analyst level, entry level, or you're the CISO. You have to understand really the strategy of your organization. You have to know what your organization values, and especially as security professionals, we have to know where our data is. We have to be informed where the data is at all times. Knowing who has access to the data, identifying single points of failure, anticipating, identifying, monitoring, evaluating security trends. We already talked about that. Drawing upon existing risk frameworks. I think that's important because fundamentally as security folks, we talked about our role is to identify and manage risk. Well, how do we do that? There are so many risk frameworks out there. So many different ways to do it. I would challenge anybody to say what's the right way. I don't think there is one right way. We're all a little bit different in what we do as organizations and maybe how we identify and measure risk. But drawing upon the existing frameworks to build maybe your unique framework that really fits your organization. Being informed and staying informed, something that's come up over the last few years, is understanding who your suppliers are. They have such an impact on the success of your organization, both from a business standpoint as well as from a security standpoint. Think about all the breaches that have happened and all the problems we've heard about in the news lately. Where are many of those coming from? They're generally, or sometimes, most of the time, coming from your third-party suppliers. You have your controls in pretty tightly, but do your suppliers have those controls in just as tightly as you do? And then finally, identifying and learning from lessons. Typically something happens and we tend to fix it and move on to the next fire and move on to the next fire. And I think it's very important as a continual improvement process to really review the lessons that we've learned, review the failures that we've experienced throughout the year, and really make sure that we don't repeat those. So learning from our lessons. And I think that's all about being informed and staying informed. The next idea is setting direction. As security professionals, I think we have a responsibility somewhat for data governance. Now, you got data owners within your organization, and you've got people who manipulate the data, but at the end of the day, who's putting in those controls to make sure that only those people that need the data can get to the data, both internally and externally from your organization? Setting direction includes the purpose and vision for your information security program, your strategy. Making sure your strategy aligns with the organization's strategy. That gives, again, you the best opportunity to succeed within your plan and your program, and allows your organization to really benefit from the value you provide in the services you're giving them through your security program. The values of the organization should be integrated within your plans and strategy. And I think that's a great idea, just to make sure that you stay aligned with what the business wants. Clear security priorities, again, align with the organization, and clear security roles and responsibilities. This whole thing about setting direction really is making sure that you line up your security program with the business. I've been in quite a few organizations that they are so focused really on just performing procedures and performing processes based on how they have them documented, because again they have to meet certain standards, that they're missing the big picture. Are they really setting the direction? Are they really aligned with the organization? Are they doing the right things for the business? Bringing coherence. And I'm going to concentrate really on that second bullet point. Risk management should be coordinated across the enterprise. This is an area that I've seen in many organizations. It's really, really difficult. Information security may have one way to identify and manage risk. Audit might have a separate method for identifying the risks that they see. Your financial folks may have a different methodology they use for identifying financial risks. You have operational risks that may be identified through a different area within the company. Wouldn't it be great if there was kind of one mechanism that could bring coherence to all risk management across the board? I think that would, to me, that if that was available, or if that was able to be implemented within an organization, it would be a lot easier for the organization to make business decisions based on the risk they see from the different areas. But right now, I believe, and tell me if I'm wrong, that many of us within the organizations, we all use sort of different methods. Again, we use one method in IT, they use a different method in security, they use a different method in operations. So you're really not always comparing apples to apples, and you might be getting conflicting data between the different departments. So how can the business make a good decision on that? Communicating and sharing information is also something, and also collaboration. That's something traditionally that I don't feel personally that as a collective we do well. I think we're getting better at it, and I think we have to continue to do better at it, especially in this whole area of sharing information. You talk about the whole cloud explosion now, these cloud services that organizations are using, and I can bet that many of you in the room, your organizations are probably using many more cloud services than you're aware of within the company. And why? Because there's not enough communication, there's not enough collaboration going on. And hence you got more risk, and probably a lot of risk that you're not even aware of that's out there. Developing adaptive capacity, so building an ability to identify and respond to change. Promoting innovation and enabling flexibility and agility. Again, if we're doing security properly, if we're working with the organization, if we're communicating and educating, a lot of these things should automatically kind of be a byproduct of that. We should be able to identify and respond to change because we're keeping in touch with the rest of the organization. We understand what's going on. We're working with the different groups. We're disseminating and implementing good practice around the organization. We're sharing our errors, our failures, our mistakes openly. We're really learning from the lessons that we're experiencing as a company. Proactively seeking lessons from other organizations, going out and going to conferences like this, going to association meetings, talking with your peers. Hey, what's going on? What are the problems you're experiencing? And then finally, this last point about adaptive capacity, don't forget about the people. Training and developing people are really, kind of the linchpin to getting this adaptive capacity that you need in order to be able to identify and respond to change. Your security program should actually strengthen the organization. And it does that by ensuring that you're baked into everything. So these concepts that I'm going through and these ideas, they start to build on one another, and I probably should have brought that up in the beginning. If you can get that first one down that we talked about and kind of work your way down, by the time you get to here and the one I just talked about previously, a lot of these are automatically going to start happening. If you've got this adaptive capacity, most likely security is being baked into everything now. Your incident response plans are probably being tested on a regular basis because you're able to adapt to that change. You're being able to take actions to protect all business assets holistically. That's another big problem that I'm still seeing in many organizations today. What's a business asset and who's tracking those? Not that IT or security or any one group has to be responsible for tracking assets, but holistically across the organization, does the business know where all their assets are? Maybe, maybe not. That's something that really is, and if your role, going back to understanding your role, if your role as a security professional is to help the business protect their assets, how can you do that if you don't know where they're at? ensuring that your business continuity plan is current, encouraging broader participation in security risk across all business units. I gave a presentation a couple months ago, and I told people that I believe the best security organization that somebody can build within their organization would be a department of one. They would, much like you have a CFO or a CEO, you would have one person responsible for security, and they would broaden the participation in security and risk management across the organization. They would educate those folks within the organization, bake security into a lot of those processes and procedures people do. And in fact, I think there you start building what we talked about before, a more business-aware security culture. No longer, if you have a team of 30, 20, 10, 5 security people, what are you doing? Well, in essence, you're putting all the responsibility on those 5 people, and they're performing all the security tasks for the company, generally. And you do, throw out, hey, everybody's responsible for security. Okay. But if you really give them that responsibility by ensuring that they have to bake in some of these procedures and processes within what they do and within the actions they perform, I think you have a much more business-aware security culture. So really encouraging broader participation across the organization, I think, is something that will make organizations more resilient, more secure, and better able to adapt to any kind of changes or issues that come up. Validating and reviewing, well, that's really part of what we should be doing today. We always talk about logging and all that kind of stuff, and this is the same thing, performing audits, assessments, testing, and other exercises. Understanding that, when we do assessments, it's just not assessing the technology, but it's really doing assessments across the whole people, process, and technology spectrum. Validating, reviewing the organization as a whole, again, holistically, should verify that it's complying with industry, legal, and regulatory obligations. And, I've been in organizations where they struggle to understand what regulations they have to follow because nobody's really tracking those. Nobody's aware. Nobody's telling the security people that here's what we have to do because they haven't reached out to legal or they haven't reached out to the communications departments yet. So again, it's very evident in some of those organizations there's really that lack of collaboration and cooperation among the groups. Maturity and measurement. So identifying a security baseline to determine existing levels of security. So how do you know whether you're improving your posture or improving within the organization? Well, the first thing you really should do is to get some kind of baseline. Develop some kind of process or procedure to collect the data you need to identify what that baseline is. Identifying appropriate metrics, and these metrics should be business focused. Now, I've been in a lot of companies where I've asked, what kind of metrics do you collect? Well, we collect how many times people call in the help desk to change a password. Okay, that's a metric. That's maybe identifying some issues around education, but is that really enabling the business to succeed? I mean, is that a valid metric? Maybe, but I'm going to say maybe not. It's identifying those metrics. If you can align your strategy with the business goals and objectives, you should be able to identify those metrics from the processes you're performing that directly relate to business success. And once you can define those metrics that directly relate to business success and collect the data and report on those, that is where you really define the value that your role and that your team's role provides to the organization. And that, to me, that's so critical. I don't see much of that happening today in many of the organizations. Reviewing metrics and then taking action. Creating dashboards is a big term that a lot of people talk about. Oh yeah, we need a dashboard so we can get this, so we can take action. But is that really happening within your own organization? So going back on this whole presentation, not that you have to do anything with it now, But hopefully, you kind of take it back and you can ask yourself these questions and maybe ask your team these questions. How are we doing these things today? And hopefully maybe get some value out of this. A basic maturity model can be used to assist in determining to what extent an organization is addressing good practice. Find out what good practices are. Perhaps maybe align yourself with a security or risk management framework. Look at what's required in order to execute that framework. Identify your gaps. Find where your gaps are, and then hopefully you can start to create those metrics and show some improvement in what you're doing. Any questions on, I know I kind of went through those quick, any thoughts, ideas on those concepts? Yes, sir.
For the customers that you work with, are you seeing that business units are still making their own decisions about products and services they're buying, or are they getting security more involved in that in the front end?
Well, that's a really good question. I would say before this whole cloud explosion, it was going there because the security folks could use other departments like procurement and the office of the CFO and accounts payables and receivables and all that to help manage that. But unfortunately, I think with the explosion of especially free cloud services, we're starting to lose grip on that. Because anybody in the organization now, if they need a service, if they can go to IT and IT says it'll be 3 months and $40,000, or they can go out on the web and it's free and they can get it today, what are they going to do, and are you going to know about it? And it's a sad state, and that's why I kind of go back to it's, we might make a step or two forward, but then as technology advances, we sometimes lose a grip on that, and we may end up taking 3 steps back. And I think that's really where the cloud, it's valuable. Businesses have been very successful, but as security professionals, I think we're getting behind it a little bit because it's very difficult for us to manage that.
And I think that's a good tie back into your slight bullet point about sphere of influence.
Yes.
Because if you can get people to understand the risk of that new practice, maybe they can rein that in at a level that's higher than you have authority to.
And that's exactly it. So again, I think that's a good point, because a lot of these things you can start seeing how they impact one another. And in fact, this very first one let's jump to this one, this very first one on tools about a cloud broker and a cloud access security broker. Do your organizations have somebody that's a cloud broker within your organization? Cloud broker is really, it could be an internal person, right? They're responsible for managing all the cloud services, or at least identifying all the cloud services that an organization is using, and recommending new services to those that, to the business departments that need them. I'm not sure I've heard of many organizations using a quote-unquote cloud broker within their organization, but and typically the CIO or somebody in IT should or could be that broker. But again, I think that's where we're falling behind on that. The next one is the cloud access security broker, and that's really a new set of tools, I believe, that's come out over the last 3 years. They call them CASBs, and what they are they're tools that will help you in many cases, and even automate in many cases. They'll help you identify how many cloud services your organization is actually using. Not only how many you're using, but if you have a list of which ones are sanctioned, now you get an idea of where this quote-unquote shadow IT is going on within your organization. That's becoming, in my opinion, that's becoming a very valuable tool within the toolbox for many organizations. Because again, I think cloud is where we are really falling behind as security professionals. Not that we're falling behind, we don't have the experience, but we don't have that sphere of influence. We're not collaborating, we're not communicating with the organization, so they're not keeping us in the loop. So I'm from Cleveland, and we recently did, a couple of years ago, we did a number of engagements with some larger enterprises up there. And one of the enterprises we went to, we were starting to get into this CASB space. So we asked them, can we do a kind of a proof of concept just to see what this is all about? They said, sure, you can do that. So we asked him, how many cloud services are you using, or do you think you're using? And he says, oh, we got that. We've authorized, I think he said, it was around 50 or 60, maybe even 70 cloud services that were being authorized throughout the company. And he says, and those that aren't authorized, we have a policy against people using them. I said, great. Can we do this POC? He said, sure. So we did a POC. We collected 7 days worth of data. That's typically how we do them. We analyzed the information, found they were using over 800 cloud services. And about 15 of those services were data storage services that people were using. And they didn't even have a sanctioned data storage service within their realm of approved cloud services. So, what's happening? So if they got 15 data storage services, why are people putting data out there? Where's that data going? And is it going to any kind of safe data storage services? It kind of blew them away, and they realized they had a problem. And that seems to be the typical story that we keep hearing in many of the companies today. Key and certificate protection. That's becoming a big issue. Gartner just put out some reports on that stolen keys and certificates are getting up to, I think the last one was like $1,000 on the black market, if they can get a valid certificate or key. And there are tools out there, much like the Cloud Access Security Broker, there's tools out there that you can run to find out how many keys and certificates you have in your environment and help you manage those keys and certificates. At the end of the day, most everything on your network has a certificate. And are you using that certificate for authentication? So what these tools will do is they'll go out and they'll collect all the certificates. They'll identify these certificates, when they expire, where they came from. And again, it'll help you identify, this goes back to this whole asset management thing too, right? A key and a certificate is an asset. And if you're responsible for protecting that, if you don't know about them, how can you protect them? So there's some tools out there that do that. Policies, plans, processes, and procedures. Those aren't technology tools, but those are definitely tools that I think organizations need in order to build this platform of security within their organization. Data discovery tools is another one that we're seeing a lot of activity in. So going back to this whole thing about assets, of course, data is an asset. Do you know where all your data is? Yeah, it's in file shares. And we have 4 servers that have all these file shares on them. How many laptops or desktops do you have? Oh, we have about 300 of them. Well, what data is on there? Oh, well, we're not tracking that. Well, years ago when I was working, I did a job for a company actually here in Columbus, so I won't tell you who they were. But we did a data discovery engagement for them. They were having some issues. The data that they kept in this database was appearing on the internet because they did some hospitality and travel arrangements for some VIPs, and all of a sudden now this appears on the internet. Well, we ran through a sample and found that 85% of the data on laptops on this, so we collected all this data, 85% of the data we collected was unstructured data, which meant it was pulled from a database and down into a spreadsheet, down into a Word document, down into a text file, no matter what it was, and it was just sitting on somebody's laptop. And what happens? Somebody calls customer service, sales says, hey, I need information. Do you have any of this? I can't get into the database. I need information on so-and-so. Oh, yeah, so they email it. So now the person, this data was originally in the database. It's not there anymore. It's all over the place. So using data discovery tools to help identify where those assets are pretty important. Asset management is a big one, and I can't tell you how difficult that is. Anybody have a good solution for identifying and collecting the data around your assets across the organization? So you're talking physical assets, programs, even your documentation is an asset. So how do you track all that stuff? Access controls, encryption, logging, monitoring, these things down there are a little bit easier, except forensics, that's a difficult tool. It takes a lot of, not only just the tool itself, but the experience behind using that tool. Maybe it's not called for as much within an organization, but it's something important to have. And what I see is most organizations outsourcing that portion to when they actually do need it. And finally, training. Training is a very important tool, as we talked about earlier. So when you talk about, what kind of tools do you need, this certainly is not a definite list. But if you don't have any of these today within your organization, it's something that I would suggest maybe looking for, but also aligning these with those concepts and ideas that we talked about. Do you need any of these to help formulate or strengthen some of those ideas and concepts? Let's see. Any comments or questions? Any other tools? Maybe a tool that I didn't mention, not a specific tool, but maybe a genre of tools that somebody found very helpful within their organization?
I have a question. What tools are you seeing companies use to assess risks of their vendors?
Spreadsheets, unfortunately. Now, there are some tools out there that will do that, but I'm still seeing far too many organizations relying on spreadsheets, the data they collect from a survey. Going back again to a client up in Cleveland, they've asked us to do a risk assessment for them, and they're adamant that they want to do a paper-based risk assessment by sending out, 100 spreadsheets of various sizes to a sample of their employees and get the data back. And now, there are some tools out there that'll do that. Anybody have a good automated risk assessment tool that they could talk about? There are some GRC. There's a kind of a family of tools called GRC tools, governance, risk, and compliance, both at the enterprise level, at the mid-market level, and there are even some at the small market level. I'm a lot more familiar with those in the mid-market and small market than I am more in enterprise. But in enterprise, you're probably talking things like Archer and probably Oracle, and SAP even, I think, has a module for that. But in the mid-market, there are a couple good tools out there that have vendor management modules that perform risk assessments. And many of those you can configure based on the standards and regulatory requirements that you have as an organization. So there are some, and if anybody wants, I won't talk about them here, but if anybody wants to know anything more about them, I'd be happy to chat with you about some of the tools that I'm a little bit more familiar with. Any other questions? Let's see. So we did talk a little bit about risk and resiliency. We talked about making sure that you had the right tools in your the right concepts and processes, as well as what tools you're going to use. Just to let folks know, up in Cleveland, we're going to be doing a Security Summit Week in the end of October. We're going to have a whole week of events going on around, there's Mobile Monday, so one day we're going to talk about mobile technologies. Another day we're going to talk about technology in general. That's on Technology Tuesday. We're actually going to have a healthcare day on Wednesday. It's going to be up at HIMSS in Cleveland. Thursday and Friday is the actual summit that we do. It's a 2-day conference, much like this one, but we do it up in Cleveland. And we do a career connection as well. We work with a lot of universities up there in getting them more involved in the security space and getting them more attuned to what we're doing, hopefully getting them acclimated and getting them introduced to professionals so that, when it's time for them to be hired, they have a much easier job getting into the market. So anybody wants any information on that, you can go out to that bottom logo, informationsecuritysummit.org, and there should be some information posted in the next few days about the fall event. It's going to take place October 24th to the 28th. So that's information on me. If anybody wants, I do apologize because I did add a few more slides to this over the last couple of days based on some recent information I got. So if anybody wants the most current copy of this presentation, they can go out to ASMGI.com, COIS win, and they can pick up the presentation. Also, there's some white papers out there. The Experian data report is out there that you'll be able to pick up as well. if you want any data around that. So I know it's probably a little bit early, but if you have any questions, I'll take them. If not, thank you very much.